Hello! It's not a Tuesday, but it is time for another in real life video. This time, rather than coming to you on a Tuesday, I figured, hey, we may as well try out this new idea I had, where it's not like a groundbreaking idea or anything, but I figured, hey, I'm planning that I'm probably not going to have time to record or have a video or whatever up, at least not one that's pre-recorded far in advance. But I just won't have time to do anything normal for the channel on Saturday because we're going to be going to a wedding. We're attending one as guests. So I figured, hey, we'll do an IRL video, sort of a quicker and easier one to sort of fill the gap, as it were, right? I don't know. And plus, we have quite a few questions to get to, and I've kind of always ruminated on the idea of, hey, every so often, maybe we should do an extra IRL video every week. And hey, I feel like this is a good way to sort of break into that, right? Obviously, I can't do this every time, especially if it's something that is very unplanned and very unforeseen, but in some cases, I think this is I feel like this is a good sort of middle ground, as it were, right? As far as not being able to tend to the usual schedule, but feel free to let me know. Like I said, I think it's a pretty dang good idea, if I don't say so myself. Anyway, this IRL video's question comes to us from a gentle viewer, and as per usual, you can feel free to submit your own question or any sort of query, any sort of, if you want me to rank something, we also do that. It could be a serious question, it could be a not so serious question, very flippant. The only catch is that if me answering it involves like it being a little too personal or breaking YouTube's terms of service, obviously I can't do that. Anyway, this question comes from a gentle viewer whose username should be somewhere in the lower third of your screen right about now. And they ask, what's your favorite or your dream persuasion system in a game? Which is a pretty specific question, I would say. Sort of notoriously, I would say, Elder Scrolls games have pretty rough and tumble persuasion systems. They're sort of, at the most, they're like a silly little minigame and diversion where, you know, you tug on one of your stats and the number goes up, or maybe it goes down, depending on how high that specific stat is. Or you just circumnavigate the entire system with like a potion or magic or something along those lines, right? You know, like charm them up or just dump a load of money into them via bribery. It's even less prevalent and important in Skyrim, where, you know, you just click and it's like, well, did I do it or not? Right? I would go so far as to even say that looking at Fallout, you know, when it comes to BGS games, a lot of people sort of hold up Fallout New Vegas as being sort of like a gold standard when it comes to like dialogue and all of that. And true enough, I do really enjoy the writing of New Vegas for the most part. You know, there's exceptions to the rule, but I would say that its persuasion system also isn't that amazing. Mostly, I do really, really love, you know what? Yeah, we'll get sort of into fine minutia about things that I do like. I don't know if I can devise a dream one, my sort of like dream persuasion system, because I think it might be, right, I think the system would have to be unique to the game itself, and we'll get into that in a bit. But we can go into things that I do and do not like. For instance, one of the big things I don't like, without trying to spoil very much at all, at the end of Fallout New Vegas, right? There is a series of persuasion, like speech checks, that, depending on your choices, depending on what like faction you're aligning yourself with, you can basically talk yourself out of what would have otherwise been a decently climactic and pretty well built up combat engagement. And the way in which it is handled, I think, is actually pretty poor and is frankly one of the weaker parts of the game. that just allows you to, like, through progressively higher and higher speech checks, you just magically talk your way out of it, right? Is it speech? Is it persuasion? Or are you just using magic? Are you just like uttering some sort of magical ritual from your mouth that just gets people to always listen to you no matter what? In that sense, I think, you know, it's all right. That's all right. But true enough, like I said, it really hurts in that moment because there's so much build up to that moment and what would have otherwise been a pretty decently climactic encounter in battle. And I think it kind of it sours the mood. It sours the moment a bit if you go down that route. As neat as it is to sort of have the available like pacifist mode or whatever, right? But it does make me sort of think like, okay, just having like this binary, like, you know, do you make it or do you not? Even if it's like up to a chance and you're like swaying your odds one way or the other. I don't know. I feel like the system of persuasion itself is maybe a little lacking. Which, mind you, like I said, is divorced from like the writing at hand, right? You can still have really, really good writing, but kind of a rinky-dink little persuasion system that really like is perhaps even detrimental, like I said, sometimes to what would otherwise be some really fun or interesting writing. But one thing that I do think that New Vegas really gets a good wraparound, and true enough, is far from being the only game that does it, but I love it when games do this. If anything, to sort of get into another example, a game which I thought had a really good case of this would be Disco Elysium, which what I'm getting at is failing those checks, right? I think it is absolutely vital for if you're going to have like a role-playing game where you have a whole bunch of skill checks and stuff like that, I think it's vital to also reward failure. Not as much as you would reward or award a player who is like succeeded at a skill check or whatever, because then it becomes like, well, what the hell is the point? You know? But there should also be something interesting and fun that happens when you fail, right? Getting like rolling poorly should be as exhilarating, maybe not as exhilarating, but should also be exhilarating in some cases when you fail, right? And like I said, there's plenty of other games that do it, like Baldur's Gate 3 certainly does it a lot. It's very fun when like you miss a roll and you have to do like your mulligan or whatever, which I think being when so much chance is involved, I do think it's nice to have that mulligan, right? Which Disco Elysium has its own sort of mulligan system as well, where whenever you level up, there are certain skill checks, not all of them, but certain skill checks that you can make again within Persuasion. But at the end of the day, it's just a skill check system. It's very like, it's very like old school pen and paper TTRPG sort of way of going about it. I feel like we could get a lot better, especially with regards to video games. Obviously, you're never gonna quite be the same as like, two human beings speaking with one another and like working through a conversation or a topic, anything like that, especially like a serious, like, very loaded topic. If you've ever had, right, if you've ever had such a conversation with a friend or loved one or whatever, sort of navigating a conversational battlefield, as it were. I don't know if we'll ever reach that point. It would be incredible, but I think if you did, you'd very much have the entire game sort of focused around that system. But yeah, that's probably my favorite thing about it. If we must do skill checks in such a way, I love a point of failure that is interesting. Because it just adds a whole nother extra layer to the idea of role-playing, because not only can you role-play, like, I'm a character who is good at, like, science, my character is good at science. Maybe I'm bad, though, right? I'm like an awkward science egghead nerd type, just lean into an archetype, if you will. I'm really good whenever it comes to science, medicine, all sorts of, like, machine stuff like that. I'm amazing at it. My character is like nailing every single role. But when it comes time to talk, I don't also want there to be, maybe sometimes, especially if it makes a lot of sense, but I don't want there to also be like, well, you charm this person with your witty scientific knowledge or whatever, right? Sometimes I want to role play a character who is ineffectual in conversation with someone, right? Like, I'm not a charismatic person. My character is deliberately meant to be very dorky and not even necessarily in a charming way. Sometimes maybe in a charming way. But true enough, I want to also be able to be like, kind of maybe mess that up big time, right? And that should also spur forward like an interesting role-playing moment and all of that, you know? If we're going through like a narrative role-playing game sort of aspect where there's like loads of dialogue trees and stuff that you're navigating through, and you're afforded the opportunity to role-play in that way, right? I think that's by far my favorite way to go about that. However, if we're looking specifically at like persuasion systems, the big one that always has stuck out to me, and true enough, I haven't played that many games that have like a unique persuasion system per se. For the most part, a lot of games just sort of lean on to that like sort of TTRPG style. But one that I really liked, and like I said before, I wouldn't say it's my dream perfect one to where it perfectly applies to every other game, you know, like I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, I want like a very thorough persuasion system in Elder Scrolls 6. Thus, you should take my favorite one and just copy paste it to this other game, because it wouldn't work out that way. But the one that I do really like and that I always think of is the one present in Deus Ex Human Revolution, the first of the Adam Jensen games. And granted, you know, I believe the original Deus Ex, and maybe even the sequel, I don't know, Invisible War, maybe had some pretty wild and cool persuasion system, but I haven't played them yet. But just speaking from my own basis of knowledge, Human Revolution it's a cyberpunk setting of a game, right? It's set in like distant but not too distant future where people have like cybernetic augmentation and all of that. And as is the case with a lot of games in that setting, they often deal with either extensively or at the very least on the periphery, they deal with themes about like losing yourself, losing your own humanity, wrestling with like what it is to be human. And I don't know, like, losing your humanity to the machine, as it were. And that is a big focal point within Deus Ex Human Revolution. And one of the really cool things about how that game does it, and I do think that there's some parts of it that haven't aged well, right? Like, I think they still have like the classification and taxonomy of like alpha, beta, omega personality types, which I think, you know, if you ask someone who's a little bit more inclined into like, psychology or whatever, a lot of that is kind of wash. A lot of that's kind of bunk, right? A lot of that is just like, you know, hearsay and just like people talking, you know, people with a general vibe. There's not much, as far as I know, that's a lot of that was like derived from like wolves and was kind of falsely attributed just across the board to everything and everybody. But regardless, kind of sucks that stuff like that is there. But as far as meshing with the like aesthetic and vibe of the game, it's amazing, I think. Also, you have options to where, or hey, hang on, let me dial it back a bit. So throughout the game, of course, you're upgrading your character and all of that. And you get these persuasion moments where it's kind of like a big deal. It sort of commands and takes over the entire scene of the game. And I guess in a sense, it becomes a mini game where your entire user interface changes. You start getting extra additional parts of data. You get a little bit of like a brief bio on the character you're talking to, and thus like information on like, oh, this person, they take pride in their work or whatever, or this person is a little bit insecure about whatever happened such and such many years ago. And you can decide like, oh, how do I want to handle that? Do I want to exploit that or like sort of assuage them of that information? You also get like a little brief snippet of like their personality or how they're behaving currently. Like, oh, they're in a bit of an aggressive mood. This person is very braggadocious, stuff like that. And sort of the way in which you approach the persuasion system is you're being pretty emotionally manipulative, right? You're saying what they want to get what you want, which is very fitting for the character of Adam Jensen throughout pretty much most of that game, I think. What makes it even better, I think, are when you get augments, you upgrade your like cybernetics and all of that, and sort of the point at which you're interfacing with other human beings in the game, which you know, of course, I mean NPCs, but they're meant to be other human beings. You start to look at them less and less human. I think this is such a cool, like, meta part of the game, which I don't know how many people really clued into this, because I don't remember a lot of people talking about this cool part of it when the game first came out, but it's dope as heck. When you're talking to people, the more upgrades you get, the more you start to look at these conversations with other people who may be going through like a very fraught and emotional thing, right? The more you look at them as a game, right? And you sort of begin to like remove yourself. You begin to remove your own humanity from the situation, right? And you look at it as sort of like a puzzle. You're examining like, okay, one of my cybernetics is ticking and telling me that this person has like an Omega style personality. Thus, if I want, I also have a pheromone that I can release that if I guess correctly which personality archetype that they are, if I guess which one is correct, and I release from my other augment a like cybernetic pheromone that responds well to Omega type personalities, then I get such and such more leeway with them in the conversation. It's basically like a little cheat to success, right? You start to remove yourself from what they're even really saying, and you're just looking at the data inputs rather than the actual conversation. And conversely, you could try and approach it the other way, where you try and navigate it by way of just like, okay, how would I really talk to this person and try to talk them down from this situation or talk them up to a situation or whatever, right? How do I get what I want out of this by being persuasive? You could just completely ignore even like your base rudimentary, because you're always required to have some amount of UI. It is video game. And, you know, given the status of Adam Jensen in that, but you could ignore all of that and just kind of freeball it, as it were. But I thought that was so cool, the way in which the persuasion system like meshed with the rest of the ideas that the game was trying to convey. I thought that was amazing. And like I said, as cool as it is, you can't just one-to-one copy and paste it to any other game that has like a whole bunch of narrative like dialogue trees and stuff. It just wouldn't work out the same way. I think there's little ideas that you could take, like the different incremental upgrades. That's kind of fun and cool. The more you put points into your, I don't know, your like interpersonal conversational aspects, the more tools you get, rather than it just being like, you have now a 25% higher chance to do this, right? I think that's a lot more interesting, a lot more compelling. Is it perfect? Probably not. But man, it feels really cool when you're in it, right? Especially the way that they make so much fanfare over these moments when it happens. At the very least, you owe it to yourself to look up parts of that game where they do it. I would have to imagine that there's other games that have such a system like that, but I don't know if there's any that tied it so closely to like the narrative itself and like the overall themes of like losing your own humanity and your sort of like own ability to empathize with other human beings and sort of like becoming more like an analytical machine or not, right? It's fantastic, I think. But like I said, the ultimate problem is I don't know how you map it to anything else. You could probably do it with other cyberpunk games because it, like I said, it's a commonly occurring theme within that subgenre. But otherwise, I don't know, I'm at a loss for it. I don't have like a great solution. But granted, I guess it's not something I've terribly thought about a whole lot, because at the end of the day, I think like a skill check system, it's okay, it's passable. You know, at the end of the day, the main writing, the like either character writing or like your ability to do storytelling is far more important. But it would be cool if there was some sort of fun system backing it up, right? But yeah, that's probably my favorite one, and those are a few things that I do and do not like about persuasion systems. When it comes to Elder Scrolls, take it or leave it. They've never been really games to me that are about like navigating a dialogue tree. It would be cool if it were there, but it's not necessary. I don't think of them as that sort of game, right? They're not big dialogue tree heavy games. They never have been for me. Even in Morrowind, where you're like going through walls of text, you're ultimately, when you're very rarely afforded choices in dialogue, and they're pretty simple, right? There's very few quests in Morrowind for how wordy it can get. There's very few quests in Morrowind where there's like a meaningful difference. You know, I think there's like, what? You could probably count on one hand, 5 or less quests that have a big major difference that you could choose to go one way or the other, you know? And even then, it's mostly up to like, am I playing a character who is pro or anti this faction, you know, or whatever they believe in, you know? But like I said, it's no big deal if they do or don't have it. But those are my thoughts. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed this. This is a bit of a weird thing, a new thing that I'm trying out with doing an IRL video to sort of take the role of, or sort of to fill a slot, as it were, because I'm almost certainly going to not be able to have time to do anything on Saturday. If you're watching this as they're coming out. If you're watching this in the distant future, ignore all that. Ignore all that. Don't worry about it. That's nothing. Anyway, until next time, please take care of each other.